Good afternoon, Rana, or good evening. How are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm okay, considering, or as my friend says, whatever. Rana, we have a very special What Have We Learned episode today because you're in it and because you have selected five topics that no one else has selected. You basically were a rebel. You went out of the list that I sent everyone, which is an expanded list, and you only used one item, and the other items are actually a delight to my heart and mind, and I hope it will be a delight to the heart and minds of people. In this episode of What We Have Learned, you have selected first the one topic from the list: Zionist settler colonialism, imperialism, and you added world of monsters, and that's totally fine. Um, and then you've selected four other topics that are not on the list. It could be like a gender issue. It could be me being too much of a male or what have you. But you've selected really thoughtful topics: grief, exhaustion, hope, and love. And this is very, very different from the lists that have been selected before. And I see it as a wonderful um, intellectual as well as emotional departure that is very productive. So I am learning as I go through this with you. So without delay, we will get to the first topic, and then I'll ask you to address these topics in 5 minute. Oops, 5 minute, مش 15, huh? انتبهي. 5 minute.
Inshallah.
Inshallah, 5 minute intervals. And we will start with Zionist settler colonialism, imperialism, and world of monsters. What can you tell us, or what have we learned in the past year about these topics?
Okay. Thank you, Bassam, for everything that you do, and thank you for accepting my change of modality, as it were. I chose this first topic to sort of be a bridge between the previous sessions and to remain relevant to what's happening right now. And so I just tried to put everything in one threshold or one heading because I think it's all it deserves, to be honest with you. As we near the end of October 2024, we've been sure of one thing for a year now, that everything has changed. Historians call these kind of changes watershed moments, but I have to confess that actually living in a watershed moment means that we have a new relationship with clarity. Some things have been made clear even to people who choose to deny it because their denial is utterly untenable anymore. Liberal masks have fallen, and as Shireen Saikali explained in the previous session, the necropolitical, what she described as the spectacle of necropolitical supremacy, is utterly clear. However, people may try to avoid this reality, one need not look beyond the hourly reports of the amount of violence being waged against Gaza, against Lebanon, against all of us. What we have learned about Zionist settler colonialism, imperialism, and this world of monsters in so many ways is what so many of us already knew. But the knowing is one thing in a rhetorical sense, and in the everyday of this relentless violence, it's an entire other thing. As I said, I understand that the previous sessions had kind of a structure to include trying to think about what we've learned about Zionism, Israel, the United States, settler colonialism, genocide. But to be honest with you, I packaged these all in one because I have little to add. It's part of why I hesitated, and you were so incredibly patient with me until I did this. I've delayed you for a month now, because I simply asked myself, what could I say that others haven't said before me? Even more, everything that we've seen this year is what generations of Palestinians already knew. But now, with this live stream genocide, with images of death machines stalking and hunting every little thing and every living thing in Gaza, there is no kind of rhetorical gymnastics that can cover this bloody reality. The lesson here, if there be one, is that Zionist settler colonialism and imperialism and this bloody American empire is genocide. It is at its core as an ideology and its very definition of a nation state built upon violence, and it is now trapped within it. All it is violence. And now, in the past year, only violence, unadulterated, relentless, and brutal violence. The masks of rhetorical nuance, once the work of us to expose, have fallen. And now this violence is on display every moment of every day for nearly 400 days. It is what you see live streamed and also what you don't see, a state that kills and incarcerates. According to a new report by Prisoner Society, in 1 year alone, this military has arrested well over 10,000 Palestinians. In 1 year, they have issued or renewed 9,500 administrative detention orders. Administrative detention, in case your audience doesn't know, is when this state arrests, incarcerates people without even bothering to charge them with anything. It is enough for this bloody entity to arrest people and hold them in dungeons indefinitely simply because they are Palestinians. Again, this is not new. It hasn't been seen at this level, at this rogue level. Arrests are only the surface of this nightmare, for our prisoners have faced oppression, beatings, starvation, being caged and tortured. This is the violence of this state, and it is the state of this state, pure violence. The lesson here is that you should have listened to the people and the generations that came before, because this is not new.
Thank you, Rana. Um, I actually skipped the first question or the pre-question, which is how are things in this moment, because your topics are going to address that throughout, especially going forward. The four remaining topics, is just to confirm, are grief, exhaustion, hope, and love.
Yes.
I'm smiling because these topics make me smile, and the other topics, Israel and genocide and state actors, and I'm just realizing how dull some of these other topics are. I hope none of the other former guests are listening. Um, well, I also suggested them. Um, so next topic is grief. Uh, what can you tell us about what we have learned and experienced about grief in the past year?
But before I actually talk about grief, if I can really quickly, outside of this 5 minutes of mine, speak to what you just said, which is the other topics. I think each of us have something to offer, Bassam, and I think people that think about non-state actors, state actors, geo-strategic thinking, that's incredibly useful. It's just not how I think, and I think part of what the magic of these forums that you hold are that it holds space for all of our ways of thinking, and that's why I had the audacity, I suppose, to offer these different topics. To turn to grief, I kind of, the reason I wanted to begin with grief, because speaking of Zionism is not something that I think I need to do anymore. So I want to ask myself and ask everybody out loud, how can a people possibly have the capacity to hold all of this horror? The very notion of survival has been teetering on the edge of an abyss of an apocalypse. Now, I, like every Palestinian, has lived with the shadow of the Nakba war, the Nakba generation whose story was either untold and trapped for so long under the veil of Zionist mythology, and the subsequent generations that survived the ongoing Nakba worked endlessly for 3 generations to tell the stories of their lives and the experience of their generations and the previous ones. So we have a language for what's happening. But this all began again. Of course, it didn't begin in October 2023. And all of us have said this endlessly for the last year. The ongoing Nakba is real. It's a daily part of our life under Zionist military occupation in this century-long war against Palestine and Palestinians. But again, October and beyond has been beyond the beyond in terms of words. I mean, even the absurd and the surreal as forms and methods cannot help explain what's happening. So many of us have been writing about as we live through the ongoing Nakba, but even in the remembering of all the massacres from 1947 and 1948 and the ones that came before that and the ones that came since, do not describe the level of devastation, destruction, and mass murder that every day of the last nearly 400 days have held. And as time passes, and as we witness now in northern Gaza, time itself brings even more sadistic death machines and ways of imposing death on our lives. In all of this cruelty, I think perhaps the cruelest of it all is being denied mourning and grief. With all the violence and the accumulation of loss has rendered us almost incapable of experiencing the process of mourning and living with grief. That said, I want to say that Palestinians are teaching the world how grief is also a part of our dignity. It is incumbent upon people to realize and understand that despite the horror of this attempted annihilation of an entire people, even in grief, especially in grief, Palestinians are telling and will continue to tell the story of a people. And these stories are what shall forge our paths towards the future. In a learning context, this perhaps can be thought of like this. Given what I've said about the ridiculousness of this relentless violence, that I have no capacity nor desire to even consider countering. I refuse the refusal of our humanity. But I think if we consider grief and how we go through the process of grief and live with grief, we can understand the vast difference between sympathy, empathy, and solidarity. And that's for us to try to figure out. I think that's the challenge in front of us because we see the humanity in grief every day.
I really appreciate this. Your remarks on grief actually also makes us think about some of the things you and I discussed because you're part of the Gaza and Context project, and we discussed, addressing topics which I think we did a little bit, but we should do more. Definitely at this stage, because everyone is grieving, everyone is exhausted, which is the next topic. So I hope that we continue to address these matters in more long form manner. Next topic is exhaustion. What have we learned and how have we experienced exhaustion in the past year?
I appreciate how you frame that because I'm not sure I can say what we've learned about it, but we have certainly experienced it. Bassam, I'm tired. I don't know about you, but I'm just worn out tired. And the geographies of my fragmented nation cannot give me space, or I don't feel as if I have space to even begin to describe this, because there's always something worse, either happening elsewhere or about to happen. I began with grief because I needed to speak of grief before speaking to exhaustion, because if we take lessons and if we constantly try to think about grief in the collective context and in the very human context of Palestinian humanity, then maybe we can see how we work through our exhaustion together as a challenge. Honestly, I'm not sure anyone could have imagined a year ago that we would still be struggling with the intensity of a genocide for more than a year. I suspect last October 2023, we were all in a state of shock, but nobody was really surprised. There's a lot to consider here about the first topic, about what we know and what we've always known about Zionism and settler colonialism. But here I want to open up this discussion amongst us as scholars and think about scholarship, knowledge sharing, and poetics. In the wake of the destruction of every institution of learning, schools and universities in Gaza, I'm asking myself, as I'm asking you, as I'm asking all of us, to think about how we approach ourselves as scholars. I think, as I've shared with you, between you and I before, that the very notion of a university has fallen and it lays in the ruins in Gaza. So what does that mean? What does that mean for who we are and what we do? I'm actually, part of exhaustion is this confession, if it need to be confession. I don't know. I'm not sure how to move forward. I do know that I need to, because I also teach in a university. I teach at Birzeit University under this bloody military occupation in the West Bank. So I live a living contradiction. That is, we keep using the tools of the old world of the monsters. We have classes, we continue to teach in the structures that we know, we assign readings, we read student papers, we hold lectures, etc. But I think we know more deeply now than we've ever known before that these tools are no longer viable. And that means that we have a challenge in front of us. Knowledge did not die nor will not die in Gaza. It's actually being reborn in Gaza. Palestine is asking us to reconsider our relationship with knowledge. Does what we do matter? Has what we've been able to do has what we do been able to stop the genocide and dismantle the structures of power that not only enable the genocide but allowed for it to be nuanced and allowed for a denial of life for so long? There's a contradiction embedded in this as well, because we see this. Why are universities even targeted? We saw this in its various iterations of violence in all of our geographies, from the destruction and mass murder of scholars in Gaza to how students and faculty are targets in the West Bank. At Birzeit alone, we have more than 150 students, our students, in Israeli prisons. Take that in. 150 students. They're targeted for arrest because they are our students. To the administrative, that's the violence here, to the administration's massive crackdown on the movement involved in the global intifada globally. They're trying to silence us. So that means what we do actually does matter. Now the challenge is, how do we do it better and bigger and more comprehensively to speak to and with what matters the most in knowledge exchange, forging a new world and paving the path for us to emerge from this cruelty. In this learning context, I suppose what I can summarize this as is that we have to ask ourselves, how do we approach knowledge? And how do Palestinians teach everyone that forging a new world requires us to reconsider and act on that sense in relation to knowledge sharing? Because what we do does matter.
Thank you, Rana, for this note on exhaustion. You said you're exhausted. You asked me if I'm exhausted. I mean, I'd like to break that down quickly, although I'm asking you the questions, but I'm answering your question this time.
Okay.
I want to break it down into physical exhaustion, mental exhaustion, and psychological exhaustion. To be honest, I am psychologically exhausted, because of the content that I consume every day. And my biggest challenge. Hey, wait, why don't you do what we have learned with me? Because these are fun topics and I'd like to address them. No, let me just quickly finish.
I think that if I could just wait, I don't want to cut you off, but I think part of it is your mental exhaustion is like it's a knowledge exhaustion, right? We are like fikir. Our conceptualization now is read through this modus of exhaustion, and I think we have to. We're not exhausted, right? We have to be careful not to liberalize that, make it an individual thing, but that's part of this violence, and I think we need to understand that's a huge part of this violence.
So I am, again, psychologically exhausted because of the nature of the images and videos and stories and events that we are consuming. But mentally, because I am I'm in a situation where we have to keep going. So mentally, I'm forcing myself to not have the psychological exhaustion affect me mentally, and certainly physically. I'm not, feeling it now. It's kind of like how when people are in very tough situations and are able to reach into the depth of their physical force and power and fortitude, and resistance, and draw additional power to be able to physically continue. So and then they break down at the end of something. This is like when you finish a dissertation, or when you finish like a 20-mile or 20-kilometer run. At the end, you'll feel it, and I don't think we are close to the end. At least the end of this level of intensity we are witnessing. So yeah, at some level we are all exhausted. All right, Rana, the next topic is hope. What have we learned, and what have we experienced, and what do we look forward to in relation to the topic of hope?
I think I included hope and love in this list because my hope is that we think about this together. Because hope is one of those hard things to hold on to, given all that we've just said about grief and exhaustion. And there's almost a kind of audacity in speaking of and on hope in all of this despair. But I think, for me at least, the point is that hope is the thread that connects us as a people through our disparate locations and all of our forced displacements inside and outside of Palestine. It connects us through time and temporalities. It connects me to the generations that came before me. It connects us through tragedies to know that there's a light in the darkness and there's hope in despair. And this is where I turn to, I think, those who give us the hope the most, which are our poets. So if you'll allow me, I just want to quote from tragedies of the past that gave us a sense of hope. This is Mahmoud Darwish from Memory for Forgetfulness, where he wrote, quote, bread sprang from the soil and water gushed from the rocks. The rockets dug wells for us, and the language of their killing tempted us to sing, "We will not leave." We saw our faces on foreign screens, boiling with great promise and breaking through the siege with unwavering victory signs. From now on, we have nothing to lose. So long as Beirut is here and we're here in Beirut, as names for a different homeland where meanings will find their words again, in the midst of this sea and on the edge of this desert. For here, where we are, is the tent for wandering meanings and words gone astray, and the orphaned light, scattered and banished from the center. End quote. Darwish managed to find a way to celebrate, commemorate, and mark time, but also understand that marking time was not only about marking the present, but also marking the present for the future. Somebody else did this in a very similar way. Itel Adnan, in the same backdrop, in a poem titled "It Was Beirut All Over Again," where she wrote, quote, "It was Beirut all over again, because the sea rose on its feet and unleashed a litany of words. It is Beirut all over again, because poets die rather than surrender, because they speak of hope and do not wear their words like a necklace of pearls, because poets refuse to die and carry hope on their backs and go from door to door, like bees go from flower to flower, to leave messages of defiance in the people's hearts." That's it. So not only can we speak of and to hope, we are in all of its forms defined by hope. It is through poets and their poetry, how these caretakers of words and language have shown us, have always shown us, will continue to show us that not only do we matter, not only will we continue to matter, but actually nothing matters more than who we are.
That's very empowering, Rana. Um, we also have a number of people who spoke about going forward at the end, because I do ask a question at the end, which actually you're answering. So we probably can refer back to these comments in addressing the final question, which is where do we go from here? And I'm really I'm really taken by how much overlap there is in terms of talking about hope among all of us who are growing closer to one another, at least in our circles. And maybe academics are a weird bunch. All right. Let me go to the last and most exciting and most wonderful topic, and that is love. And that is something that might not seem to some people to be something to discuss right now, but it is actually the thing to discuss right now. So I am very much taken by your selection of this, and moved by I mean, it does take simple audacity in the most beautiful sense, so I appreciate it. What have we learned? How have we experienced love in the past year?
I think love is embedded in everything. It's the frame that holds us, and it's a metric unknown in the dictionaries of conquest and colonialism. I should say, Bassam, that I chose love because I think I've been thinking about love all along. I just didn't always know it. From the time of my research on my dissertation to before I began researching my dissertation to the time when I first started to learn how to read and live in Arabic, I was thinking about resistance. I wrote a dissertation about a revolt that happened in 1929, and over time, since then, I've been thinking that resistance cannot nor should not be theorized. But what it is actually is it's our acts of dignity and our practicing of love from 1929 until 2024 and beyond. Um, I think one of the things about love is it defies language in ways that are magical and mystical. It's not talking about horror or violence. It lives above and beyond that. It gives us the means and the methods for you to be able to grieve, to live through exhaustion, to learn how to sort of think about thinking again, which is all I've been trying to talk about today. Um, as I said, it defies everything, including words and a dictionary. And I want to turn again to the words of our poets and writers. And here it's Ilyas Khouri that I turn to. We lost Ilyas recently. And so there's something very bittersweet about quoting him. This is from his novel Gates of the Sun, Bab Shams. And here he wrote, and this is Ilyas: "You answered me by saying that what was worth dying for was what we wanted to live for. Palestine isn't a cause. Well, all right, in some sense it is, but it isn't really, because the land doesn't move from its place. The land will remain, and the question isn't who will hold it, because it's an illusion to think that land can be held. No one can hold land when he's going to end up being buried in it. It's the land that holds men and pulls them back towards it. I didn't fight, my dear friend, for the land or for history. I fought for the sake of a woman I loved." Who can say it better than Ilyas Bassam?
Thank you, Rana, for this wonderful intervention. I do have one last question because we do have a couple more minutes. Uh, Based on everything that you shared, what can you share with us in terms of where you think we're headed from here? And you can, of course, address this at any level, or what's next. I'm not asking a crystal ball question. I'm just asking maybe for a reiteration of what you said about hope and love and grief, and hopefully you can share with us some parting words as to where do we head from here, where are we going, where are we headed, personally and collectively, however you'd like to address it.
Um, you said it. I don't have a crystal ball, and I've always tried to avoid trying to think about that. And so I'll give you the kind of sensibility that I approach today with, which is sort of not trying to offer anybody any kind of, as I said earlier, geostrategic understanding of power. Um, that's important, and it's something that we have to live through and with. But I think the way that the way that I've been trying to live amongst my people over the last year is that we have to live in a contradiction, and sometimes that's confusing and tiring and massively depressing. It's full of despair. And in order to sort of fight despair or put despair where it is, not to deny our despair, is to understand that hope floats and love is why we're here. So I think what's happening now, given the relentless monsters that are determined to continue a war of annihilation, is that it will continue, and will continue to offer the world new images and notions of violence that are today unimaginable and tomorrow will seem almost normal to people. That's the short term. But I think the long term is far different. The long term is one where we understand that survival in all of its fluidity and in all of its grief is actually going to forge our way into a new world. And that's why I think it's important for us to think in these sessions, Bassam, as Shireen said in the previous one. It's not what have we learned, or not only what have we learned, but also understanding what Palestine and Palestinians have taught us. And I should say that I think this is not sort of I don't want to make this into a non-human sense of Palestinians. This is something that Palestinians here in Palestine and Palestinians everywhere learn. So Palestinians are teaching each other as well, not only teaching the world. Um, And I don't know what to say beyond that. I just know that as we forge, we have to understand that through practice and practice, through understanding our grief and living through it with each other, to having mercy for our exhaustion, to holding hope and love within our hearts and within our minds, I think this is um, how we can begin to see beyond the bloody reality of today. But I want to be very careful right now, and I want to share with everybody that all of these concepts, um, they're not pure, and I hope that we can struggle with them. I hope that we can think about them together. And I do think that we need to struggle with them. We need to be challenged by them. And we need to be aware of everything that's happened in this old world. And we need to be very vigilant to not let them become commodified and become a part or a tool of this old world of destruction and cruelty, and understand that love, grief, and exhaustion are part of who we are and how we get through. And we have to covet them and cherish them and protect them. Future will show us what freedom and getting free looks like.
يسلم تمك Rana.
Yeah.
Um, saying those things is very important, and saying them from Palestine, where you're at right now, is all the more important. So thank you so much, Rana, for your, um, what we have learned version, which is very inspiring. And I hope that we learn from your suggestions, and I will definitely add these, or some of these, definitely some of these um, topics to our list as we speak with others. Shukran, Rana, again, and I hope that we continue to speak, hopefully in better times.
يعطيك العافية.
Allah يعافيك انت. I know I've seen you, on various forums and podcasts and conversations online, and as I shared with you, and I know that you are also going nonstop. So يعطيك العافية انت كمان, and hopefully we'll continue to be in touch. Stay safe, and have a wonderful day.
Come and visit us, Bassam.
إذا بيفوتوني, I usually do go all the time, but we'll see how it's going to happen
يلا.
this time. طيب, salam.
Bye bye.
Bye.